Imagine a continent so vast, so rich, so wildly varied in its landscapes that the people who first laid eyes on it from the other side of the Atlantic genuinely could not process what they were seeing. Mountains that make the Alps look modest. Rivers wider than anything in Europe. Forests stretching for thousands of miles. Plains so flat and so endless they seem to go on forever. This continent had been home to tens of millions of people for over 15,000 years before a single European set foot on it. And in the space of roughly 5 centuries, it became the most powerful nation in human history. How that happened, the brilliance of it, the brutality of it, the contradictions at the heart of it, is one of the most extraordinary stories ever told. This is the history of America. Let's get into it. The first Americans did not think of themselves as Americans. They had no reason to. They were the Lakota and the Cherokee and the Iroquois and hundreds of other peoples, each with their own languages, their own histories, their own sophisticated ways of organizing society and understanding the world. By the time Europeans arrive, the Americas are home to an estimated 16 million people. Some live in vast urban civilizations. Cahokia, near modern St. Louis, is at its peak in 1100 AD, a city of perhaps 20,000 people, larger than London at the same time. The Iroquois Confederacy of the Northeast is a sophisticated political alliance with a constitution and a tradition of democratic deliberation that some historians argue directly influenced the Founding Fathers. These are not primitive peoples wandering a wilderness. These are civilizations, with everything that word implies. Then in 1492, Christopher Columbus lands in the Caribbean. He thinks he has reached Asia. He has absolutely no idea what he has actually found. Within decades, European powers are competing to claim pieces of this vast new world. The Spanish dominate the South. The French push into Canada and the Mississippi Valley. And the English begin eyeing the eastern seaboard. The first permanent English settlement is Jamestown, Virginia, founded in 1607. It is a catastrophe from the start. Disease, starvation, and conflict with the Powhatan Confederacy killed the majority of settlers in the first years. At one point the survivors are so desperate they resort to cannibalism. The records confirm it. This is not the heroic founding story that gets told in textbooks. What saves Jamestown, ultimately, is tobacco. The settlers discover that the Virginia soil is perfect for it, and that Europeans cannot get enough of it. A cash crop economy is born. And with it, a demand for labor that leads directly to one of the darkest chapters in American history. The first enslaved Africans arrive in Virginia in 1619, just 12 years after the colony's founding. The institution of slavery, the buying and selling of human beings, the ownership of people and their children and their children's children, becomes so deeply embedded in the economic structure of the southern colonies that by the time of the American Revolution it is essentially unmovable. That contradiction, a nation founded on ideals of liberty that simultaneously practices chattel slavery, is the central wound of American history. It never fully heals. Through the 17th century, the English colonies along the eastern seaboard grow. Puritans fleeing religious persecution arrive in Massachusetts. William Penn establishes Pennsylvania as a haven of religious tolerance. The colonies develop distinct identities. The merchant culture of New England, the plantation aristocracy of Virginia and the Carolinas, the diverse middle colonies of New York and Pennsylvania. They are English in language and law and culture. But something new is forming. A people shaped by the experience of building communities from scratch in a vast, ungoverned landscape. More self-reliant. More impatient with hierarchy. More convinced that what a man could build with his own hands was worth more than the family he was born into. The break with Britain, when it comes, is triggered by taxes. The 7 Years' War has left Britain with enormous debts. The British government decides the American colonies should help pay for their own defense. It begins imposing taxes. The colonists are furious. Not necessarily because the taxes are ruinous. They are actually quite modest. But because they have no representation in the British Parliament that is imposing them. No taxation without representation. The slogan captures a principle. And principles, once articulated clearly, have a way of becoming unstoppable. protests escalate. In 1770, British soldiers fire into a crowd in Boston, killing 5 people. The Boston Massacre. In 1773, colonists disguised as Mohawk Indians board British ships and throw 342 chests of tea into Boston Harbor. The Boston Tea Party. Britain responds with punitive laws. The colonists respond by forming the Continental Congress. On the 4th of July 1776, delegates from the 13 colonies formally adopt the Declaration of Independence, written primarily by Thomas Jefferson. Its opening sentences are among the most powerful ever written in the English language. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These words change the world. They are also written by a man who owns over 600 enslaved people across his lifetime. That contradiction is not incidental. It is foundational. The Revolutionary War is not a foregone conclusion. The British Army is the most professional fighting force on earth. The Continental Army under George Washington is undertrained, under-equipped, and perpetually short of money. Washington loses more battles than he wins. What he is genius at is surviving. Keeping his army intact. Keeping the cause alive when everything seems lost. The winter at Valley Forge in 1777 to 1778 is the low point. Thousands of soldiers without adequate shoes, coats, or food, dying of cold and disease in the Pennsylvania snow. Washington holds them together through sheer force of will and moral authority. French intervention turns the tide. France, seeing an opportunity to weaken Britain, sends money, supplies, and crucially its navy. At Yorktown in 1781, Washington and French forces trap a large British army on a Virginia peninsula. French warships cut off the escape by sea, and the British surrender. The war is effectively over. America is independent. Now it has to figure out what it actually is. The Constitution, drafted in Philadelphia in 1787, is one of the most remarkable political documents ever produced. A group of men, educated, opinionated, deeply suspicious of concentrated power and of each other, somehow negotiate a framework for government that is flexible enough to survive for nearly 2.5 centuries. The system they create is deliberately complicated. A federal government divided into 3 branches: executive, legislative, judicial, each able to check the others. Power divided between the federal government and the states. A Bill of Rights protecting individual freedoms from government overreach. It is imperfect. It counts enslaved people as 3/5 of a person for the purposes of political representation, while denying them any rights at all. It leaves the question of slavery for future generations to resolve. Those future generations will pay an appalling price for that delay. The new nation expands westward with breathtaking speed and breathtaking violence. The Louisiana Purchase of 1803, when Jefferson buys an enormous stretch of territory from Napoleon for $15 million, doubles the size of the country overnight. And settlers begin moving west in their tens of thousands. What stands in the way of this expansion are the people who already live there. The policy of Indian removal, formalized under President Andrew Jackson with the Indian Removal Act of 1830, forces tens of thousands of Native Americans from their ancestral lands at gunpoint. The Trail of Tears, on which the Cherokee Nation is marched west in the winter of 1838 to 1839, kills an estimated 4,000 to 8,000 people from cold, disease, and starvation. Conducted by the government of a nation that declared all men are created equal. If you are finding this story as gripping as I am, do me a favor right now. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We cover the history that schools forget to teach, the stories that actually explain how the world got this way. You do not want to miss what is coming. Now back to America. By 1860, the contradiction at the heart of America can no longer be contained. The question of whether slavery will expand into the new Western territories is tearing the country apart. When Abraham Lincoln is elected president, the Southern states begin seceding from the Union. The Civil War that follows is the bloodiest conflict in American history. Over 600,000 soldiers die. More Americans killed in 4 years than in both world wars combined. The battles, Gettysburg, Antietam, Cold Harbor, are savage beyond anything the country had experienced. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 transforms the war from a conflict over Union into a conflict over slavery. His Gettysburg Address, 272 words, redefines what America is supposed to be. Government of the people, by the people, for the people. The North wins. Slavery is abolished by the 13th Amendment. But the peace that follows is sabotaged. The Southern states implement black codes and then Jim Crow laws that recreate the conditions of subjugation in everything but name. The promise of equality is deferred for another century. The late 19th and early 20th century sees America become an industrial giant. Steel, oil, railways, electricity. Names like Carnegie, Rockefeller, and Morgan accumulate wealth on a scale the world has never seen. Immigrants pour in from Europe, Irish fleeing famine, Italians, Jews fleeing persecution in Russia and Eastern Europe, all of them arriving at Ellis Island and beginning again. America enters the First World War late, in 1917, and its fresh troops and vast industrial output help tip the balance toward Allied victory. Then it retreats back into isolation. The 1920s roar. Jazz, prohibition and bootleggers. The Model T Ford. A stock market boom that feels like it will never end. Then in October 1929 it ends. The Wall Street crash triggers the Great Depression. Within 3 years, a quarter of the American workforce is unemployed. Banks collapse. Farms fail. Families lose everything. Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal begins to rebuild confidence and put people back to work. But it does not fully end the Depression. The war does that. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on the 7th of December 1941 brings America into the Second World War. Within 4 years, American industry is producing more weapons, more ships, more aircraft than the rest of the world combined. The D-Day landings of June 1944, the largest seaborne invasion in history, begin the liberation of Western Europe. The war ends, and America emerges as the dominant power on Earth. Its cities intact. Its economy booming. Half the world's industrial production is American. The dollar becomes the world's reserve currency. American music, jazz, blues, rock and roll, conquers the world. But at home, the contradictions persist. Black veterans who fought for democracy abroad come home to segregation, discrimination and violence. The civil rights movement that builds through the 1950s and explodes in the 1960s is the long-delayed reckoning with promises made and broken since 1776. Rosa Parks refuses to give up her seat on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955. Martin Luther King Jr. delivers his I Have a Dream speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in 1963. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 dismantled the legal architecture of segregation. A turning point, even if not an ending. The Cold War shapes everything. For 4 decades, America and the Soviet Union face each other across an ideological divide, each armed with enough nuclear weapons to destroy the world many times over. Korea, Vietnam, Cuba. Every conflict in the world becomes a proxy battlefield. Vietnam is the wound that will not close. 58,000 Americans die in a war the country cannot win and increasingly cannot justify. Public opinion turns. American confidence is shaken in a way that takes a generation to recover. The Cold War ends not with a bang but with the slow collapse of the Soviet Union. The Berlin Wall falls in 1989. America stands alone as the world's sole superpower. Then on the 11th of September, 2001, 19 men board 4 commercial aircraft and America's world changes again. The Twin Towers. The Pentagon. A field in Pennsylvania. Nearly 3,000 dead. 2 decades of war in Afghanistan and Iraq follow, costing trillions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of lives. The gap between what America says it is and what it actually is has always been the engine of its history. The Civil War was fought across that gap. The civil rights movement was fought across it. Every great American struggle has been a fight to make the reality match the promise. A nation permanently in argument with itself. Loud, contradictory, infuriating, inspiring, and utterly impossible to ignore. If you made it this far, you are exactly the kind of person this channel is made for. Hit subscribe, leave a comment below telling me which part of this story hit you hardest, share this video with someone who loves history.